Hello and welcome everyone to the fourth edition of Ananke's Women in Literature Festival. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome an amazing trailblazer, Nilofer Kaul. A little bit about Nilofer Kaul. Nilofer is a PhD and training and supervising analyst in Delhi and a member of the Indian Psychoanalytical Society. She won the Francis Dustin Prize for her paper on parasitism in 2018 and the Rosika Parker Prize. Nilofer, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Rosika Parker, that's right. Yeah.
For her paper on casual violence in 2021. Her book, Plato's Ghost, on liminality and minus links in psychoanalysis was published by Karnak in 2021. She's on the editorial board of the International Journal of Applied Psychoanalysis and the British Journal of Psychotherapy. Her monograph on consent, Fearful Asymmetry, has been recently published by Sabin, an independent Delhi-based feminist press. She taught English literature to undergraduate students in Delhi University for 25 years. So welcome, Nilofer.
Thank you, Sabin. Thank you for the glowing words and for welcoming me to this platform. Very happy to be here with you.
We're honored and we're privileged to have you among us, Nilofer.
Thank you, Sabin.
So, Nilofer, I'd like to begin this session with you telling us about your journey and the field, the landscape you're in. It's so interesting and so relevant. So let's begin with that.
Yes. When you say my journey, would you like me to tell you about psychoanalysis? Because I taught English literature, as you just read out, for 25 years and more, maybe.
Yes.
And that is probably still my first love. And on that route, I met psychoanalysis, and I thought they were really good bedfellows. Actually, it was a very compatible marriage. So it didn't feel like a switch, actually. It felt like more of the same. It felt like all my life, this is what I was looking to organize, both my internal world as well as the world of literature. So it sort of, if you like, gave me a foothold in the world, a way of arranging and organizing stories, both other people's and my own. And so that's how it happened. And they continue to nourish each other in my mind.
I think it is very, psychoanalysis, especially when you're building a character, a plot, even the setting of the story, because, it's not just the characters as in the people that you're, creating. It's the setting as well, which have characters of their own, right? So,
Yes,
so it,
yeah.
So it's very, so that's like a, add on if if your first love is psychoanalysis, right?
Well, okay. I did feel that literature was the first one I encountered.
Okay. I thought the other way around. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, how did this book come about? Consent.
That's actually a really interesting story because it was never really meant to be a book. But it was while I happened to be teaching Yeats, which I always enjoyed teaching. I always enjoyed teaching modern poetry. And I was teaching this particular poem, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's called Leda and the Swan. And maybe at some point in the conversation, if we have a moment, I'd like to read it out to you, to tell you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would you like me to do that now?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So the poem goes, a sudden blow, the great wings beating still above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed by the dark webs, her nape caught in his bill. He holds her helpless breast upon his breast. How can those terrified, vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs? And how can body, laid in that white rush, but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof, and tower, and Agamemnon dead. Being so caught up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? So, just a short poem in which we see Zeus or Jove, as he is called in the Greek or Roman pantheon. You know, he could adopt different disguises, and he often adopted these disguises to get the woman he wanted, right? So here he adopts the form of a swan, and he wants Leda. And so he becomes the swan, and the poem imagines the rape, and then it stays. And this is what I found actually chilling about the poem when I was teaching it, that it stays with what happens, what are Leda's, what is her subjectivity after the rape, during the rape, and after the rape. And you go through different emotions that she has. You know, she can feel his heart beating, she can feel the shudder of the loins, and then he drops her. So for a moment, it is like she has experienced his power because Zeus is omnipotent. This is the masculine, uber masculine figure, Zeus. And what is, to me, the poem in it had the seed of complicity and collusion that women often suffer from. We as women suffer from. So if it's not too much to ask for, I'll just read out a little passage from
Yes, no, please.
The poem describes the great Zeus swooping down on Leda while disguised as a swan. In the lines quoted, the poet imagines the brutality of this asymmetric encounter, her helpless breast upon his breast. After the swan is done, the poet stays with Leda, and the brutal encounter is broken into its parts. In an adjectival crescendo, the girl is staggered, then awed, then caressed, and finally dropped. In this charged little poem, every caesura ushers in a new emotion. It is the sudden blow that staggers Leda. She's unable to push away from her, with her terrified fingers, the feathered glory of Zeus. The dread is both terror at the brutality and awe at his majesty. And then the poem ends with a question that hangs very uneasily. Did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? So what is it that we as women, what happens to us when we are, in a sense, caught up by the omnipotent masculine figure? And this has, I think, resonance for us in our personal lives. It has resonance for us in our professional lives and in our political lives, right? That I thought this poem really captured the asymmetry between Leda and the swan, that in that moment, she experiences what it must be like to be this powerful and what that would taste like and what happens when you are dropped by that. So I thought it had the seed of something in it. which was swirling in my mind. Around the same time, I was talking to a patient who was generous enough to let me into a world that I didn't know very much about, the world of BDSM practice. It is still something which is considered stigmatized and ridiculed. However, I think it merits some attention, some reflection, that in some ways, these are ritualized ways in which people's deepest and unspeakable needs are being met with. So I thought, as though from two different spaces, the same questions were being asked, that what is consent? You know, what does it even mean? Because in BDSM practice, you actually have to have a signed consent before a practice session, where both partners agree that these are the rules and regulations that will be governing this interaction. So even if I tell you, beat me to death, the contract will ensure that you will stop before I die, before you actually kill me. So that this became a question in my mind, that do we really, what does it mean that I have consented that you choke me to the point where I'm begging you to choke me more, but I'm contracted for you to stop, right? So it was a very, very complex area that opened up. And because these were all little thought waves that were calling me to put it together, to arrange it in my mind, I started writing. And this caught Urvishi's interest, and she said, "Why don't you develop it into a monograph?" Um, and that's how this book came about. So that's a really long answer to your short question.
No, it's really interesting. And going back to Greek mythology, that is
Mm,
something I really love. And I just Googled, the because first I was Googling how many women Zeus has raped. And then, I thought, all right, let's check in Greek mythology. So there's like a complete huge list.
absolutely.
And I think Hercules' mother, Alcmene,
Mm,
Alcmene,
mm,
apologies for the, then there's Medusa as well. And Hera was vengeful, and all these women, not only were they, raped, one was turned into a heifer, and Medusa had these snake hair. So they
dreadlock. Yes.
exactly, and yes, and they bore the brunt. I mean, they were not just victims and survivors as well, but they were made, culprits. People, or these Greek gods and goddesses were vengeful, as if it was their fault, right? So
Yes.
what does that tell us about even consent?
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea of consent is not really valid for in a trans historical way. But what my book tries to focus on really is to look at the narrowness of the word consent. So it's really a critique of a particular kind of rationalist discourse, let's say a kind of modernity, which talks as though the word consent can be applied uniformly, and during the course of writing this is when the Me Too storm erupted. And constantly, what was very tiring was the way in which positions became hardened and polarized. right? So there was there was um there were the men who were accused, and they were saying we didn't do this. And there were the women who were accusing, and the feminists who were supporting them and saying that I never asked for this, right? And this kind of, he did it, she did it. He's lying, she's lying. He said, she said. That's what it became. And I thought the moment things become polarized, we actually stop thinking, because, the language of consent, being as it is based on a particular kind of almost legal understanding, it does not um, in any way lend itself to the expanse that subjectivity is, you know? And which is why I use the myth of Leda and the Swan to talk about the fact that women's desires are very complex, contradictory, slippery, changeable, and language that we are given is very circumscribed, very narrow, very reductive. So when you are asked the question, did you go to so and so's house? Did you have a drink with them? Did you wear a skirt? Maybe you will say yes to all of these things. But did you want to be raped? Obviously not. You didn't want to be raped. So then, but you agreed to going this far. Yeah, verbally you agreed, maybe. But can language ever um, communicate the complexity of the emotions? And can the emotions ever be freed of the complex matrix of gender relations in which we are all embedded? I think those are the concerns from where the book emerged.
And coupled with just thinking out loud here, coupled with the societies that we're living in, you know, I don't know, it may be more pronounced in, countries, feudalistic countries or agrarian societies, and that's just me thinking out loud. With patriarchal belief systems that are deeply entrenched. So how do we, going forth, how do we talk about consent in such a system, and where we need to work organically? Because, awareness needs to be very organic, otherwise, it doesn't work. Like in Pakistan, this phrase has become controversial. Mera jism meri marzi, my body, uh,
My
uh, um, my rules or
my
something.
prerogative, my
Exactly, right?
prerogative.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that is so important. Now people are interpreting it or perceiving that as, which is fine as well. But when a woman is talking about my body, it's her body to begin with, right? And it's not just, like people say, she's a modern woman, which again, uh, it's ironic. Even now people talk like that. But, it's about bodily autonomy. It's about, if somebody's raped, or, if a woman doesn't want uh, to have more babies, or doesn't want to have a child, there's so many things. So how, and of course, especially about, it's about consent, to begin with, consent in every uh you know uh, uh phase, or every thing that concerns her body, right? So in such a framework, or in such a situation, or in such a system, how does consent, and what kind of messaging do we need when it comes to consent?
See, the the central plank of what I'm saying is to address this particular question of yours is to say that the first thing to acknowledge is that there is an asymmetry between men and women. The problem when we use the language of consent is that I am equal to saying no to you. But suppose here's a relationship in which the man says, would you like to have a meeting in my office on Sunday? And now, what choice do I, as his subordinate, have? So the languages of consent, I consented to go there. But what meaning does that language have anymore, right? And this is just a very common everyday experience. I don't know which woman has not experienced this, I would like to say, So for me, I think the problem is that this word consent comes in the way of us understanding the complexity of the issue, which is that it is asymmetric. Men and women are not positioned equally. In fact, it's only it's like a childlike thing to assume that things can be fair and equal because they're not. And just because I'm saying that doesn't mean I'm voting for it. I'm only pointing it out that this is not true. It doesn't exist. Even if you ask my permission for it, I'm not free to say no. You see? So, and this is where we hit a roadblock, whether it is with the language of consent or the language of democracy. How free are we actually when we exercise our choices? We are not free. So if we want to think ethically about the ethics of men and women and the right to choose, we have to begin on the assumption that things are not equal. And we have to forge a new language that includes the complexity and the contradictory nature of our desires. Because if the cost of my saying no is that I lose my job, why will I say? And again, as I said, I don't know which woman hasn't faced a similar situation.
Absolutely. So my next question to you is, in what way does psychoanalysis expand our thinking on the subject of consent?
Yeah, psychoanalysis, because, unlike the rationalist discourse that masculinity has made its own, right? Which is a kind of almost like a legal understanding of the world, a very de-psychologized understanding of the world, where emotions and feelings are devalued constantly. Psychoanalysis opens up language and understanding to include everything that is so-called in the domain of the irrational, that the unconscious is actually not governed by the rules of logic and pragmatism and cause and effect. That memory, for example, memory. Now, if you go to court against somebody, you want to go and give testimony there. How accurate is your memory going to be? Somebody asks you, this happened 10 years ago, and now you're bringing up this complaint. And they start asking you, what color was this person wearing? What was the cup of, what was the cup like that was given to you to have tea in? I'm just giving you trivial examples. But the point is, memory is always playing tricks on us. I don't remember yesterday. I mean, you may remember yesterday differently from me. So psychoanalysis allows the irrational. It allows the fact that memory is often wishful thinking. I remember it in the ways I want to remember. So my memory is always going to be colored by my desires, you know. Um, Similarly, when it comes to language, psychoanalysis allows you to see that what we say, what we put out into the world, is one part of us. But that the moment I say something categorically, the antithetical part will raise itself as a doubt in my mind. You know, oh, I didn't want to do this. And inside me, the voice will say, are you sure? Okay. So in analysis, we open ourselves to the fact that we are often contradictory creatures. We are mostly contradictory creatures. So what we say is true, but that truth is not with a capital T, but it's a provisional truth. It's with a small t. And this allows for a certain nuance, which opens the way to understanding the relations between men and women and how complex they are. And this is not just a burden for women, it's also a burden for men, as I understand it.
That's absolutely true. Thinking about consent. So, is there something which is false consent?
Yes, apparently there is such a word that's such a term that exists, and it can be quite troubling, right? Because it can be that there is some coercion that under which people give consent, but it is not done freely. So, for example, in India, it's very common. One of the things which is very common is forced marriages, right? I don't know if it's there in your
Yes, there
society.
is. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
right. So, for example, if they discover that this girl is having a relationship with somebody and that is outside their community, it's outside their caste, they will, if you're lucky, it will stop with false consent. And if you're really unlucky, there is a very terrible term for it, which is honor killing. It's actually a really
Yeah.
terrible term because, honor is just an awful word to use in the context of killing your child, right? So, false consent is often used to coerce women. They say that, we freely uh, allowed our parents to marry us off here, or we freely allowed this man to have sexual relations with us. But actually, these are taken under coercion. Yeah.
Sorry, I muted that. I would love to know, as we are approaching the end of our session,
Yes.
I would love, uh, I would love it if you could tell us, a bit about, summarize or give us tell us about, the central argument of the book, and if we could have another reading, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Actually, why don't I just read out a passage
Yeah, that
and
would.
maybe that'll give you my
Yes,
central
absolutely.
argument. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, uh, in conclusion, it can be said that consent is the offspring of a confusion between what we desire, that is fairness, and what we are up against, which is asymmetry. The psyche confuses what it wants with what is. This psychic confusion may well be a symptom of our fear of naming things for what they are, as though in calling things by their name, we are willing them to stay the same. Thus, long before we can use the term consent, we need to see the pervasive violence inherent in asymmetry. Perhaps a beginning can only be made when this asymmetry is recognized as underlying every encounter with otherness. By not acknowledging this, we may be participating in this violence, as we do when we confine ourselves to spoken words, where an exchange of words is cited as evidence. However, recognizing the asymmetry places a certain ethical responsibility on the one who occupies the favorable position in any given power dynamic. This can facilitate a revision of our efforts to understand the troubling nature of asymmetry. If otherness seems to evoke violence, can we see the recognition of asymmetry as enabling us to expand our thinking beyond the binaries of sameness, difference, masculinity, femininity, victim, perpetrator? Yeah.
Wonderful. If you could tell us where we can get this book and also show us the cover.
Available on Zuban Books. It's also available on Amazon. So you could order your copies there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Nilofer. This was truly, and I really mean it, it was truly an enlightening discussion. Thank you for your time and your amazing insight.
Thank you so much for having me over. All the best for your festival.
A pleasure.